Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into Ondo Finance. You shared quite a bit of material on them, focusing on how they're trying to connect, traditional finance and DeFi, bringing real-world assets onto the blockchain.
Exactly.
So our goal today is just to pull out the key pieces, really understand what Ondo is aiming for, and why it might be significant.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sources paint a picture of a company started back in 2021, founded by, interestingly, some ex-Goldman Sachs folks from their digital assets team.
Ah, okay. TradFi background.
Right. And their core mission really is taking familiar financial stuff, like U.S. treasuries, bonds, money market funds, and putting them onto public blockchains, tokenizing them.
So bridging the gap, taking the reliability maybe of TradFi and mixing it with DeFi's efficiency and access.
Precisely. And what's quite interesting is they're not just creating the tokenized assets themselves, but also building the underlying tech infrastructure to support it all.
Okay, let's get into their products then. First up is OUSG, the Ondo Short-Term U.S. Government Treasuries Fund. Now, this was initially linked to a BlackRock ETF, right, SHV, but now it seems heavily invested in BlackRock's own tokenized fund, BUIDL, plus others like Franklin Templeton.
That's a key development, holding a lot of BUIDL now. And yes, assets from Wisdom Tree, Wellington, FundBridge too. It's structured as a tokenized limited partnership interest.
Why not for everyone, yeah. It mentions qualified purchasers and accredited investors, offers around, 4.07% APY?
Around that, yes. And there's also ROUSG, which is basically a version where the yield is paid out by increasing your token balance automatically, a rebasing token.
What's the thinking behind leaning so heavily into BlackRock's BUIDL now?
Well, I think it's pretty strategic. BlackRock launching BUIDL was a huge signal for the whole tokenized asset market. Yeah. By holding BUIDL, OUSG is basically aligning itself directly with that major institutional push.
Okay, makes sense. Sort of riding that wave.
Yeah, and it likely streamlines things operationally too, potentially tighter integration.
Got it. Then there's USDY, that's the US dollar yield token.
Correct. This one's aimed more at non-U.S. individuals and institutions. It's positioned as a yield-bearing alternative to traditional stablecoins.
So how's it different? It's backed by treasuries and bank deposits, yielding maybe 4.25%?
Around that, yes. The key difference is that inherent yield. Stablecoins usually just aim to hold a peg, like $1. USDY is designed to also provide a return from those underlying assets.
And it's over-collateralized. Needs KYML checks too.
Yes, know your customer, anti-money laundering, standard compliance stuff, especially when you're offering a yield-bearing product linked to securities. There's also a holding period involved. Makes it potentially better for holding longer term than just a transactional stablecoin.
Right. Okay, then we have Ondo Global Markets, OGM, launched this year.
Early 2025, yeah.
Tokenizing stocks, bonds, ETFs from NYSE, NASDAQ, again for non-U.S. investors, promising 204/7 access. That sounds ambitious.
It is. And tied into that ambition is the Ondo chain. They announced their own Layer 1 blockchain specifically for institutional-grade RWAs back in February.
Ah, okay. Mainnet expected later this year. Why build their own chain, though? Why not just stick to Ethereum or Solana?
That's a really good question. I mean, using existing chains gives you users and liquidity right away, but a purpose-built chain lets them tailor everything.
Like what?
Like having permission validators think trusted financial institutions running the nodes. Built-in features like RWA staking, special oracles, things optimized purely for finance and, crucially, for regulatory comfort.
Control and compliance, basically.
Exactly. Leads to potentially better efficiency and easier paths for institutions to get involved. There's still multi-chain, though, across Ethereum, Solana, Polygon, Cosmos via Noble.
Right. Okay, let's touch on the Ondo token itself. Primarily governance, you said, for the Ondo DAO.
Yes, holders get to vote on protocol upgrades, changes, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Total supply is capped at 10 billion. Circulating supply was around 3.16 billion as of April.
And the price saw a high last December, $2.14. Now more like 84 cents or 84 cents and 85.
That's about right. There's talk of staking being introduced to potentially some deflationary aspects down the line.
And partnerships seem key here. BlackRock, obviously, but also MasterCard, Coinbase, Franklin Templeton, Morgan Stanley, PayPal, BNY Mellon. That's a serious list.
It really is.
Yeah.
And having someone like Patrick McHenry, former chair of the House Financial Services Committee, as an advisor, that adds significant weight, particularly around the regulatory perspective.
Definitely signals they're serious about playing by the rules and integrating with the existing system.
Absolutely. It shows strong institutional validation. And if you look at where they stand market-wise, They're a big fish in the tokenized treasury pond.
Second biggest, right?
Uh,
After Securitize, which is mostly BlackRock's BUIDL.
exactly. Which brings us back to OUSG holding BUIDL. It really highlights how interconnected this is becoming and Ondo's central position in it. They had about $992 million in tokenized treasuries under management as of April.
So wrapping up the main points, Ondo Finance is really pushing hard to bring traditional assets onto blockchains, focusing on regulated products, institutional clients.
Yeah, that's the core idea. And their multi-chain strategy plus building Ondo chain shows, I think, a real long-term commitment to building out the infrastructure for this whole RWA space.
But it's not without challenges, I imagine.
No, definitely not. The RWA market is, well, it's still new, very competitive. Regulations are still evolving. Interest rates matter a lot for yield products. And then there's the question of the Ondo token's long-term utility and value capture. Plus, potential centralization risks with things like permission validators. Lots to watch.
Right. So a final thought for our listeners to chew on. As more and more of these real-world assets, these RWAs, move onto blockchains, how might that fundamentally change things?
Yeah, how could it reshape access to financial markets? Could it actually, democratize investing globally?
And what completely new financial tools or services might pop up from this mix of old finance and new tech? It's definitely a space to keep an eye on.
For sure.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.